You often hear from different parties, we don't know enough, we need to have more information, more data, but then it's a good idea for me as a scientist also to have like a number, an approach that you could take to actually try to quantify what knowledge do we already have and what is missing.
Welcome to the Elements of Deep Sea Mining podcast. I'm Eric Young. Joining me today is Ellen Pape. Ellen is a researcher and professor at Ghent University in Belgium. Ellen's expertise is deep sea benthic ecology, but I actually asked you on, Ellen, to walk me and the listeners through this stakeholder engagement work that you've done previously, and we'll get into that. But hi, Ellen. Thanks for being here.
Hello. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, so I said that your expertise is deep sea benthic ecology. Is that redundant to say deep sea benthic ecology?
No.
Why?
So we're talking about deep sea when we're talking about waters and sediments and also deeper than 200 meters. So deep sea also encompasses the water column. So it's not only sediment. So when we're talking about benthic, we're talking about the seafloor. So, and most of the seafloor in the deep sea consists of soft sediments. So it definitely makes sense to mention both deep sea and benthic.
So you can be a benthic ecologist in water shallower than 200 meters.
That is correct. Yeah.
I should know these things if I'm going to do a podcast on the deep sea.
I work in the marine biology research group. Most of my colleagues are actually working on shallow water, so on coastal environments. So they are benthic ecologists as well, but they don't work on the deep sea.
And yeah, how did you get into being a deep sea benthic ecologist?
That's very interesting story. So I did my master thesis around mangroves, looking at mangroves, and then I also tried to get a PhD. I submitted an application, but then that didn't work out. And then there was a project of my thesis promoter on the deep sea. It was called BioFun. It was about looking at biodiversity and ecosystem functioning. And that project targeted the Mediterranean and the Atlantic Ocean, looking at many different groups. So looking at bacteria, myofauna, and maybe I can explain later what myofauna is, macrofauna, so different sizes of different organisms, looking all of it together, looking at how diversity varies along a gradient of primary productivity. And so because if you go from the west to the east Mediterranean, there's a gradient there in productivity. So that means food availability.
Okay.
And that may affect then also the organisms living in the deep waters and in the deep sediments. So that's what we looked at. And also try to see how that affected functional traits or ecosystem functioning. So that was the project that ran and for 4 years and which I worked on for my PhD. And now I forgot your question.
But then, well, I mean, this is the intro phase. So I'm just interested in how you got to do the kind of work you're doing. So the reason I reached out to you was because you are one of the co-authors on this report on stakeholder engagement, which was published in 2025. The report is called Potential Pressures and Impacts of Deep Seabed Polymetallic Nodule Mining, Perspectives of the Belgian Stakeholders from the Roundtable Meetings, and is published in Memoirs of the Marine Environment. Then, tell me about what it is you normally do your research on, and how did you get involved in doing this stakeholder engagement part?
So as I said, I did my PhD on the deep sea already, looking at biodiversity and ecosystem functioning, focusing on myofauna. So myofauna are tiny organisms living at the seafloor, but more specifically within the sediments. And I'm going to spare you like the definition of myofauna, but it's dominated by nematodes, which are these tiny worms. So that's where my expertise lies. And from 2014 onwards, I was involved in research related to deep seabed mining. So that's when our lab, our research group, got a service agreement contract with one of the contractors in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone. So it's one of the ISA contractors. And for this contract, we helped them to carry out part of their environmental baseline studies. So that's how I rolled into the topic of deep seabed mining related research. And how did I get then involved in these Belgian roundtables? It's actually my former promoter, my former supervisor who invited me at a certain point. So they started this process without me. So the first 2 meetings, I wasn't there. And then I think it was realized that it was quite a lot of work And then I was also invited to the table. So that's how it actually came to exist.
Nice. So yeah, I was really enthusiastic about this report when I first encountered it. I'm still enthusiastic about it for a number of reasons. I really like the method that you guys used, which basically the way you took the concerns that people in the roundtable meetings brought up, and then you translated that into very kind of specific and actionable research questions. That was great, and I want to get into that. And then the second part of this is you also published kind of all of the stakeholder input that you got through the meeting. So for people listening, it's a great resource in kind of, on one level, a summary of some aspects of the societal concerns around polymetallic nodule mining, and then how that relates to operational research questions. And but it's also just this great resource in terms of just kind of giving a list of societal concerns that people have around deep sea mining. So for people like me who are kind of interested in trying to understand the conversation and the concerns and the dynamics around the whole topic, it's super valuable. I got a lot of information there.
Okay, thank you.
So then maybe just start by explaining this method, because I think that is the really cool and interesting part of this. How does this work? Maybe just, give the listener an idea of what the method is. Okay. Where did it come from, and what did you do?
Would it be possible to, I don't know, share like the scheme of the process with the different steps? I don't know, maybe you can edit it in somehow, or is that not possible?
I try not to put visuals in so that people who are listening, so we'll just have to struggle through with trying to explain things verbally.
Okay, so I will do my best to try and explain the method. So the method that was used actually was used before in a project around offshore wind farms. So I was not involved in that, but the first author of the report was. And they did that also together with the same cabinet of the Minister of the North Sea of Belgium. And there it was quite successful. And so this is also the method that was included in the paper that was published by Gill and colleagues. And I forgot the year when it was published in, where you can see the full method and the scheme that was used. And so it was decided. So as I mentioned, I was not involved in the very first two meetings, but then it was decided at a certain point to actually try to apply this method that they used for the offshore wind farm project also to the deep seabed mining scenario, or in that context. So because what I heard was that government representatives were actually getting a lot of input from different stakeholders with different viewpoints, with different concerns about deep seabed mining, and it was kind of very challenging for them to navigate. And so that's why they decided, let's bring them all together around the table to have these round table discussions, and then we can hear them all at the same time, so to speak. So what were the methods that we used? So the first step was to scope for societally major concerns. So we asked each of the participants to actually provide us with a list, and this was in writing, of the concerns that they had. And it was very broad, as you can see also in the report, because there we included all the concerns. It was about many different aspects, about governments, about the lack of data, and so on and so on. Mm-hmm. And so that's also where I came in. So that's when I entered. They got this list of concerns. And then what we did as a first step, or what I did as a first step, was to try to categorize these different societal concerns into different topics, into different, so it's actually themes, topics, and subtopics, where we used the same categorization as that used by Diva Amon and colleagues. They had a paper that was published in 2022.
Yeah.
So which was about knowledge gaps, and we tried to fit each of these concerns, or link each of these concerns to these different topics.
So at this point, you're already thinking about linking into knowledge gaps. You already have a publication on knowledge gaps, and you're like, okay, maybe we can fit these societal concerns into the existing conversation around knowledge gaps. So you're classifying that way.
Yeah. That's very true, because you often hear from different parties, we don't know enough. We need to have more information, more data. But then it's a good idea for me as a scientist also to have a number, linked to that. Like, how much do we need to know more? And this is an approach that you could undertake or that you could take to actually try to quantify what knowledge is missing, what knowledge do we already have, and what is missing, instead of just saying, we don't know enough, because that's quite fake.
I mean, this is such a recurring thing as someone who interviews people all the time on the deep sea mining conversation. That is such a recurring kind of soundbite.
And also this method, what it resulted in for the offshore wind farm project is that then they also went to investigate, okay, what information do we have? Like, can we answer each of these questions that we formulated? And the ones that we cannot answer right now because we do not have the data, we actually design a research project to actually address these data gaps and information gaps.
Just so
yeah,
sensible.
I think for me it's also it's logic for me. So I think it worked for that project. At least that's what I've heard, because I wasn't involved directly, of course. But this was our attempt to actually try and quantify more statements that are made. And I'm not saying I'm disagreeing, but I'm saying it would be good to have a number attached to that, and to have like a way forward as well.
Yeah.
Like, what things should we investigate first? Although, of course, that's a difficult exercise as well, which I also experienced during the roundtable meetings, because then some parties said everything is important.
Yeah.
But which I do not disagree with, but of course you need to start somewhere, and then that's where prioritization can come in.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so you came in once there was already all of this written input, and you started to classify this kind of according to the knowledge gaps categories that were mentioned in the Diva Amon et al. Paper. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then what happens next?
So also where we felt that some concerns were not adequately covered by the topics that were in this Diva Amon et al. Paper, we actually erected new ones, or we added new ones. And when we were done with that, we also presented that to the roundtable participants. So not only in writing, so we also emailed. It was a huge table. I think at a certain point we called it the Beast, because it was with a lot of different lines, and it also expanded because at a certain point we also shared that table with external experts, so that we're not taking part in the roundtable processes themselves, to also ask for their input. And so what kind of scientists did we send this table to? It was scientists that were mentioned by the different stakeholders that were present around the table. So they said, can you please also ask input from these and these and these persons, but also to the Mining Impact 2 consortium, in which our research group was also a part. So just to have like input from a lot of different experts who are knowledgeable on the topic. And at the same time, we also had a category in this Excel sheet stating the relevance or the importance of the different topics. Like, for instance, I don't know, temporal variability in abiotic conditions. Why is it important to know that in a context of deep sea pit mining? So this was also included in this massive Excel sheet.
So you're not in that column. You're not assigning importance. You're putting a qualitative question there. You're saying, why is this important?
Yes, indeed. So it's not saying this is more important than another concern. Yeah. No, that's not what I'm trying to say. Sorry if that wasn't clear. It's more because often, also when you look at the mining code, it says, you need to measure, or you should measure this and this and this and this, but it's not explained why you should measure it. And that's what we try to actually include here in this exercise. And so we got feedback. I think it was in total from 24 experts. I had to look that up again just to be sure. And then we just asked, is everybody agreeing? So also to the roundtable participants, do you agree with the links that we made between your societal concern and the different themes, topics, and subtopics? And do you think we were exhaustive enough? Did we cover all your societal concerns? So at the first step, we also took into account societal concerns about governance. But then at a certain point, we actually had to make the decision to limit ourselves to the concerns surrounding the lack of data and information about the environment. Why is that? Because we had to limit ourselves. This was not funded, this exercise. So this was done all voluntarily. And I think if we would have included everything, we would still be in the process of doing that, because it was a lot of different concerns. And also because these roundtable meetings were facilitated by scientists. And this is our expertise. And I think if we would have discussed governance issues, other experts might have been better at this. So, and then we so we did list all the societal concerns, and then it was also suggested at a certain point that other roundtable meetings could be organized to address those. But I'm not aware if this has happened in the meantime or whether there aren't any plans to do so in the near future.
Yeah. So again, getting back to the information that's in the report. So then you narrowed your focus down to the societal concerns that were kind of scientific in nature. You included all of the other concerns in the appendix. So that's all there. So for people who are interested in following this up or doing similar work, there's a bunch of great information there. And then you did the next step, which is to try to make operational scientific questions just based on the scientifically relevant societal concerns. And that's where the bulk of the analysis of the report is.
Yeah. And if I can also add one more thing, is that we also decided to focus on environmental impacts of nodule, of deep sea bed mining for polymetallic nodules, because it would probably be different. There would be some shared questions, but there might also be other concerns related to that. So polymetallic nodule mining in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone and focusing on offshore environmental impacts, because at a certain point there were also concerns about impacts on bats and so on. And so, that's how it can easily grow and it can become very big, and we try to make it more manageable to actually do that, because it was already a huge list.
Yeah. Right. And I mean, it seems to me like a very sensible starting point to start with the Clarion-Clipperton Zone nodule concerns, because those are kind of like, this is where the industry is most likely to actually get started. And and it makes sense to, again, start with the actual on-site marine impacts, because that, I think, is where most of the kind of deep sea mining relevant scientific research is being done.
Yes.
You're right. There's a lot of onshore environmental concerns that are relevant and should be tied in and get brought in also. But I think that that's a little bit more, in a lot of cases, the job of kind of bringing in other research from other kind of fields, whereas this makes sense. You're guiding this towards the deep sea research field. Okay. And it sounds like, this has been so far already a huge process just to get this far. I didn't realize you had so many. I was kind of imagining like, okay, you call a meeting, you sit a bunch of people down, you talk to them, they write out some things, and that was the data set. But already you're doing multiple rounds of data acquisition and getting in the stakeholder input. So it's incredibly thorough, especially for a non-funded activity.
Yeah. And we thought it would be nice to actually continue the work. Because we had a lot of also suggestions also mentioned in the report that we could continue working on. And so it's nice that we can do that within Mining Impact 3.
Yeah, right. So we should say also, so Mining Impact 2 it's a EU-funded research project, which is now complete. And then there has been a new project also funded by the EU called Mining Impact 3, which you're going to continue this and related work.
Yeah, so just to correct, a small correction. So it's not funded by the EU, it's funded by the different countries, the different states.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, you narrowed down the boundaries of what you're going to focus on. You've got all the stakeholder input. And then the next step is translating that. Is the next step translating that into the operational questions?
Yes, indeed. So I made the links with the different topics that were defined also by Diva Aman in her paper, and also added some new ones, also based on input from the external experts. And then we actually translated these different societal concerns, because also sometimes there was overlap, and we rephrased it into one major societal concern, so to speak, and we tried to be as comprehensive as possible. And then working with that, we translated these societal concerns into overarching questions, which are more broader questions. And then these were broken down into different operational questions, which are more tangible, which could be considered as research questions, which, if given to a researcher, they could actually start and investigating this right away. And so why did we do this? Because you have the societal concern. Let's say if you have the answers to all of these questions that are underlying the societal concerns, then you can actually say if it's a valid societal concern, yes or no. Because it could be that there is a concern, for instance, about, and this was something that was brought up, which I didn't think about before as a deep sea benthic ecologists about the effects of electromagnetic radiation, for instance. It could be that it's not a major concern because it's not, I'm not sure. This still needs to be researched, but this is something, for instance, that could be looked at.
Yeah. And then if I understand this correctly, so you kind of recategorized these things, these societal concerns, into 9 kind of main overarching categories.
What I also wanted to mention is that each time we went back to the participants and asked their opinion, and then we amended based on their suggestions. So it's not that we formulated it and it was okay. So we had a lot of interactions, both in person at the roundtable meetings, but also via email. So I have a lot of different documents on my computer with feedback, which I had to go through and then amend.
How many in-person meetings were there in this process?
I would think around 10 or something. I think there's this list also in a report.
Yeah, there's a list of participants. Yeah.
The people there, of course, not everybody could always attend, but most of the time, everybody was present.
Yeah, wow, so thorough. Okay, so then you've got, just to recap, so there's like the societal concern, and then there's overarching and operational questions is kind of like the next level. Societal concern, overarching questions, and then operational questions.
Yes, that's correct.
So kind of 3 levels.
Yeah. And then this entire list of questions, because I think in the end we came up with 80 research questions. We also went back to the external experts that we consulted for our massive Excel table that we made at the beginning, and to see whether they agreed or whether they could think of other, like, is this research question adequate, or should we add more research questions, maybe questions that we didn't think of? And so that was also done again.
Amazing. So so just as an example, right now I'm thinking a lot about kind of the timelines to recovery. So there's this societal concern around resilience, and then you kind of formulated this as benthic and pelagic communities will not tolerate or recover from deep seabed mining impacts. That was kind of like the wording of how we word this concern around the resilience and the recovery of communities. So then in that you've got, I guess, 2 different overarching questions. So you translate that into, number 1 is, what is the change in pelagic and benthic ecosystem structure and functioning after being exposed to deep seabed mining impacts? And then the other one is, what is the recovery rate of pelagic and benthic communities after having been impacted by deep sea mining activities? And so those are the overarching questions. And then the operational questions is even more detailed. So one example of that is, what is the differential speed at which various descriptors of ecosystem structure and functioning are recovered after damage due to deep sea mining activities? So that kind of just highlights this, how I'm so in love with this. You're structuring as someone who listens to people argue about this all the time, you're structuring the concerns, you're structuring the arguments. You're saying, okay, you're concerned about recovery. Kind of like, what do we mean by recovery? What timescales are we actually talking about? What species? What descriptors of ecosystem structure and functioning are we going to use? And let's actually get down into the details and see if we can bring some knowledge to this question. I think it's just great.
Thank you again.
And then, like you said, you do that over 9 kind of overarching categories, and you end up with 80 specific research questions.
Yeah. And what I also would need to mention is that there was one concern that was put separately. I'm not sure, which was about mitigation.
Okay.
So we had 9 main societal concerns, which was about impacts, and 9 was the 10th one we put separately because not all the parties that were present at the roundtables agreed on including that one, but some did. And so we wanted to reflect that also in our report, and that's why we put it separately, to still mention it, but actually putting it aside to actually acknowledge the fact that not everyone agreed to include it.
Does that mean that for the rest of them, you managed to get consensus on the concerns, that these concerns and descriptions of the concerns is something that kind of everybody can agree should be quantified as a research question?
I think as much, because it was a long time ago, so I'm not sure how it was formulated, but I just recall very explicitly that about this last one about mitigation, that that was not something that was supported by everyone, and that's why we put it separately. So I do think the first 9 ones were agreed upon by everyone, That was at least how I perceived it.
Do you remember why mitigation was controversial? What about it is?
I think, and this is my opinion, and I might be wrong, so I don't want to
Mhm.
say anything that's because then you already think about deep seabed mining happening. You're already thinking that this is a possible scenario. Whereas for some parties, we should actually first think, is this something that we actually want to do?
Interesting. Yeah.
That's how I perceived it. So I hope I'm, reflecting the
Yeah.
positions well. Yeah.
Yeah. That is a problem or a difficulty in doing some of this engagement work is how do you formulate the discussion and what assumptions you build in. And obviously, I mean, that can just go to all sorts of levels, like people can oppose the framing that we need or want the minerals. And then you've got to reconsider how to, there's so many assumptions even built into the way that we generally talk about deep sea mining. And then you get pushback from all sorts of places. So it's difficult to operationalize.
Yeah, it's very true. We have to be very careful with wording, how we wrote it down in the report, but also how we presented it. Because at a certain point also some members of the authority of the secretariat, were present and we gave them a presentation also on the work that we did. And so there it was also very important that everybody agreed with how it was presented as well. So that's something that I've learned, try to navigate between different concerns.
Yeah.
As well, and to make sure that everybody was supportive to the best extent possible.
Anything else that you think is worth mentioning in terms of the method? We haven't.
So what we did was we have the long listing of the societal concerns. We didn't prioritize or say, okay, this is more relevant, yes or no. We didn't make any judgment about that. We linked them to the overarching questions, and then the overarching questions were broken down in different research questions. But then, so what they did in the other project around offshore wind farms, they also used that method to actually start selecting operational questions, which are the most pertinent ones, which do we not have answers for right now. So we should actually start with those. And then also use that to actually set up research programs to address these questions. And this is something that was not done within this process. We did touch upon it very briefly on how we could prioritize, as I said, because I thought, well, for instance, for those questions we don't have answers yet to, maybe those could be prioritized, but then some parties stated that everything is important. We cannot make this, we do this exercise. Other parties also stated that we could, for instance, look at ecological risk assessment. What kind of concerns are more relevant or which are more likely to happen? Or what kind of studies, as defined by the different operational questions, are actually feasible? And so these could be different methods, but we did, and these were also mentioned, I think, in the discussion section of chapter 1 in the report, but we didn't go into depth because, there was no resources also to work on this in depth.
Yeah, I mean, one obvious next step would be to put this up against existing knowledge and to just say, okay, here's all the questions that we have. How many of these questions do we have not even answers to, but data that fit into these things? That would be
that would be great, but it would also require quite some time.
So again, you came into this from being a marine biologist. So I guess I'm interested just kind of generally, how was that? What did you learn about stakeholder engagement and interdisciplinarity and things? Did you feel like this work was relevant and helpful also in your kind of normal, more scientific research, or was it frustrating? How much do you take forward from this?
I think it was interesting also because I wasn't used to working with different stakeholders before, so it was definitely interesting to hear different perspective and what is what is the concern that is out there. What I definitely had to learn was, I think, communication. As I mentioned before, also when we were writing things down or preparing a presentation to present our work, it was very important how it was phrased. So it was very important to actually reach out to people and ask their opinion. And also what was also important was to make clear agreements about what is the scope of this work, what is it not, what will we focus on, who will be the authors of this report. That's also why we included the preface and so on, to make sure that everybody was also comfortable with how it was brought forward.
What about the actual results? Did you feel like, okay, all of these societal concerns are ones that you had heard of before, just having worked in the deep sea mining space, and the operational questions kind of all made sense, and you're like, oh yeah, this is obvious, people have brought this up before to me, or I'm not surprised by this? Or were some of it genuinely new concerns and research questions for you?
I think most of them were quite logic. Like this is also something that we as scientists are concerned about. Some of the concerns I didn't really think about before. Like, for instance, introduction of invasive species, for instance, that was a concern that was brought up, which actually makes sense that we also research it. Whether it's actually valid or whether that would be a huge risk, that is still to be investigated, to my knowledge. Also, the presence of physical structures, because you would have your vessels at the surface, how this affects the environment. Also, I think the turbulence created by the thrusters, for instance, so these are like infrastructure to remain at the same location with your vessel. These can create quite some turbulence, how that affects the environment. So these are things that are not only actually specific to deep seabed mining. It may also be valid or relevant maybe in other industries, although I cannot think of one right now. But these kind of things that were also brought up, which I thought, yeah, that's interesting. That is also makes sense that this would be something that we actually investigate. And it might not be relevant, but it might be.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's also what I kind of took away in reading these, is that there wasn't so many. I think those two that you bring up were also ones, or I think I've heard people kind of talk about, oh, our technology isn't going to have a surface vessel that has to stay in one place, and so we're going to avoid all of the impacts of those thrusters. I've heard people kind of mention that, but I never really thought that it was, such a concern in that way. But yeah, again, I think that when I read through this, I thought, oh, this is just such a great classification and structuring of the ongoing conversation that I think most people who work in this space are aware of, and to have it laid out and structured like this is super valuable. If I can just continue to praise this to you over and over.
I am. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So then, I guess it's worth mentioning the one thing that you guys did do was kind of the phase 2, where you compared this against the ISA regulations to see how well the regulations matched with societal concerns and operational questions. But there, I think you kind of phrased that as a proof of concept, as opposed to like a thorough, because obviously that would be a huge task also.
Yes. Yeah. It was something that was initiated, but then it seemed while we were doing this, it took a lot of time. It took much more time than anticipated. It's a lot of documents to go through. But we think it could be an approach, or at least a start of an approach, to start and doing this, to check whether the mining code is actually addressing these concerns. But maybe before we do that, we should actually first see, okay, what concerns are valid, and then start to compare. And on the other hand, there's also concerns which, do not fall under the responsibility of the authority. So that's actually covered by other conventions, for instance, like about pollution and so on. That's covered by, what is it again, IMO and so on. Yeah, but that's also very important to actually take into account.
Yeah, and that's a good point. One that I'm just kind of learning as I do this is that there's so many relevant regulatory pieces that aren't actually under the umbrella of the ISA. The ISA has its remit, and then there's so many other things relevant to deep sea mining that are regulated in other bodies and statutes and things.
Yes, that's true.
Then I guess I want to ask you what it's like working in the deep sea mining space. Like, you've now been working in deep sea mining, you say, since 2014.
Yes, that's correct.
And my understanding, having talked to people, is that it's kind of gotten more and more contentious and polarized, and increasing amount of strife in that space over that time. So yeah, what is it like? What's your experience of the tone of the conversation around deep sea mining? And did this process where you talk to people from different sides of the issue kind of teach you anything about that?
So the question is, do I experience this evolution that we see in the discussion getting more and more polarized. Yes, that's very true. Actually, also I teach about deep seabed mining at the university to bachelor and master students, but they all tend to have the same perspective, more the NGO side. I guess it also makes sense because they also are more like advertising about it. Like in social media, I see sometimes these posts passing by on Facebook from Greenpeace and so on. Also, within the research projects I'm working on, we also, and because we think stakeholder engagement is very important, there's always part of the meetings or meetings that are entirely open to also different stakeholders that are also then joining these meetings, providing input. For instance, as I mentioned before, we had a service agreement with one of the contractors, and sometimes I would get these comments as, you've gone over to the dark side.
Yeah.
And that was kind of hard for me because it doesn't change how I do my research. So I'm not doing my research differently when it's funded by a contractor or when it's funded by the government. So that was kind of hard to deal with sometimes, to get this criticism.
What about the idea that, so you work in marine biology, and if you look at deep sea mining through just the marine biology lens, then what you see is the risks and the harms, but none of the societal benefits. That's kind of out of your scope of expertise or focus. And so sometimes I think that the way that people end up looking at this question is that whichever part of the piece and it's often whichever part they were introduced to it from. So I was introduced to it from I had done research on nickel supply chains and realized that there was a lot of harm to the nickel supply chain in the rainforests of the tropics. And so then I was much more aware of the potential benefits of deep sea mining than having not known anything about the marine biology aspects. So yeah, what do you think of that hypothesis as where you say that people come into your classrooms being mostly anti-deep sea mining? Is that partly because you're teaching marine biology and they're biologists and
Yeah, that's true. That is definitely true. I mean, most of the people in my class, if not all, would be marine biologists. Yeah. I tend to have very little geologists in my class. Yeah. Because they might think differently about it. Yes. I'm not saying they do.
I suppose that would be something that even in the information in this report, I could take a look at who was bringing up which concerns and see, if the biologists it would just make sense that biologists are going to bring up the biology relevant concerns, and that, geologists tend to be more kind of focused on the resources and is this a good place to get resources from or not, I think the most important thing to touch on is, kind of what's happening next with this. So, like you say, there's now Mining Impact 3, which is going to do something following up on this, but that something could be in a number of different directions. But nobody so far has kind of taken the actual results and ran with them in terms of classifying how much of these research questions have been answered or how much are even currently being researched. I think that would also be a really great.
That would be very, very interesting, and I would love to see that happening. And how we will approach this with a Mining Impact 3, it remains to be seen. So we have our first meeting in a couple of days. So the people that are involved with this specific task within the project, and then we will see how we will move it forward. So
yeah, as someone who is relatively new to scientific research, I often kind of wonder how how all of the scientific knowledge on a topic is organized, so that, when I'm coming into a topic and I'm as a master student or now a PhD student, I'm man, it would be really nice if someone had just organized all of the questions that had been asked, organized who is researching on these topics, because you kind of find out that this is just a bunch of networking, and you have to you can do a literature review, but that's only good for so much. And then you just kind of have to find out who was working on things and go to conferences and go to meetings. And it's often felt surprisingly disorganized considering what a big part of the research kind of routine it is, settling on a research question and finding out who else is working on it. So I think it would be super cool. I just would be great if somebody could, do the next step with this and take some of this set of 80 operational research questions and link it even to just where, even if it was just like to link it. And maybe this is something that an AI can do pretty soon. It's just kind of take this set of questions and link it to the studies that have been done and the research projects that are ongoing, because it would be super useful in terms of guiding people who are also interested in these questions.
And what we also should not forget is the amount of data that have been collected, because it could be that we have questions that we have answers to the research questions, but it could also be that we do not have the answers already, but we do have the data somewhere.
Right.
Yeah. For instance, database that is hosted by the Secretariat, so by the International Seabed Authority that holds data as well, even historical data, so data from before 2001 and so on. So that's also very interesting to take with us. Also, research that has been done in the area which did not have deep seabed mining in mind, for instance. You never know. I mean, there's also data out there that could serve to help us with answering these questions, which has not been used potentially right now.
Yeah, that's a big that's a big avenue of inquiry also. It's just like there's so many statements about, oh, we've got so much data. When it comes to this question of like, do we know enough or not about the deep sea? One of the kind of narratives is we've got so much data. We've got terabytes of data in this or that database. And then the pushback is, well, yeah, but there's a difference between data and knowledge, and even knowledge and, wisdom or whatever. Like, we need to do something with all of that data. So it would be, I wonder a lot about, how much of that data is known about and available to the people who could actually use it. I mean, that's a huge challenge also.
Yes, definitely. Data management is very important, but often also overlooked or considered sometimes. I feel, and this is a general feeling, that I have less important. But it's so crucial, to make our decisions. But of course, what people should also realize is that in order to do this properly and effectively, you also need resources.
Right.
And this is so important that this is actually something that is being followed up on.
Yeah. Yeah. As a whole other, data management is surprisingly difficult also when you get into the details of how to structure and organize data so that someone else can find it, even if you have the hosting capabilities and the sharing capabilities. It's hard.
It is.
Okay, so I ask everybody this somewhat awkward question. I don't expect you to have a well thought out answer to it. Yeah, my PhD research is about like how we ought to make governance decisions in situations of where we have to trade off between whatever incommensurable values. It's amazing. I ask this question to everybody. I've done this 40 times now. I still don't know how to word the question well, but like in terms of having to make decisions around trade-offs between categories that are difficult to compare, ecosystem impacts versus the value of deep sea mining, do you have any thoughts or advice on how we should approach those questions?
Yeah, that's a difficult one and a good question. So I'm not a governance specialist at all. So and I think, and I hope that people who are could provide a better answer perhaps. But from my perspective, the most important thing is actually transparency about the trade-offs, because when we're talking about deep seabed mining, it's not only about the environment. And I think biologists will not like to hear this, but it's also about economical interests and strategic autonomy and so on, mineral supply and so on. So it's a very complex matter and with many different aspects. And what we need to do is to be clear about these different trade-offs. And what scientists can do is they can actually clarify, if they have the information, of course, what could be impacts of deep seabed mining and also what are the uncertainties. But it cannot decide scientists cannot say which aspects are more important. Like, should we more care about the environment or more about the economics and so on? And this is not up to the scientists to decide. And I think when you make a certain decision to go forward deep sea mining, you should be explicit about which trade-offs you then accept, because ultimately it's a societal decision. We can say, if you do this will happen, and then it's up to you to say, well, cost benefits analysis. What do we choose? But it wouldn't be fair to leave that up only to the scientists, because there's many different stakeholders involved.
Yeah, no, I love that answer of transparency, because this is what I'm trying to work on with my PhD also, is how can we structure these trade-off questions and the knowledge that we would need in order to try to make them in a way that a lot of people can have open and constructive discussions. And so, like, I don't think that it's my job or anyone's job to kind of structure this in a way that the questions get answered by the structure. But if we can structure the information in a way that is most comprehensible and digestible and transparent, that people can at least know what they're talking about and maybe even be talking about the same thing, that would be just amazing in the conversation. And that's, again, why I think that the method and the work that is here in this report is so useful, because you've taken a whole bunch of different issues and concerns and tried to translate them into descriptions that everybody can agree on. And by the sounds of, the fact you had 13 meetings and just recurring emails and over trying to get people to agree on the wording of things, that it's obviously a hard process, but I think it seems like you're doing
Yeah.
you're doing the Lord's work here.
And at a certain point, of course, we had to make a decision, because sometimes it can be that one stakeholder says, oh, I want you to change it like this. And another stakeholder says, I want to change it like this. But then ultimately, that's also why we mentioned explicitly the facilitators, the scientists, were the authors of the report. And so it can be that not everybody agrees with some of the wording.
Yeah.
We try to make a compromise, but it can be that they don't agree. And then this then reflects that.
Yeah.
So they can still say then afterwards, well, we actually didn't agree with that wording. So I think that was the safest option.
Nice. Well, yeah, I think it's a great step towards transparency in trying to make these decisions. So my standard closing question is just kind of, well, I guess maybe for you, so you've got this 80 lists, you made this list of 80 research questions, and then there's a question of prioritization. Are there any questions that you think are worth prioritizing, like just in your own research? So given that there's some amount of researchers and biologists and economists listening to this podcast, and if you could influence someone to do some research in a certain direction, like what stands out to you as research to prioritize?
Okay, so what I think, and this is something that we still should put maybe more focus on, but this is also something we will try to do with the Mining Impact 3, is to look at connectivity.
Yeah.
So between different deep sea populations, to see how they are connected across space, and which environmental factors may be important there, because that could also help with the spatial management. So for instance, contractors, they need to define impact reference zones and preservation reference zones for the purpose of monitoring. Not sure if I have to explain much more about that.
No, yeah, that makes
also
sense.
To see how effective the API network is. The API stands for areas of particular environmental interest. And as you know, a couple of years ago, more were added to this network. So first there were 9, and then there were 13. And so also to actually sample those areas as well, and to see how connected they are to the areas, to the exploration contract areas, for instance. So that would be, I think, one of the key scientific questions, at least for me. I guess others might have different questions as well.
That makes sense. I guess so. These protected areas, these reference areas, like my understanding is that if you're going to mine this area, you want to leave an area that is as similar to the area that you're mining as possible. So you want to have a reference area that is kind of as close to identical as possible, that you don't touch, so that you're not destroying anything that's irreplaceable.
So that's for monitoring purposes.
That's for monitoring purposes.
The idea would be,
area.
Yeah, so that you go there and take samples, or you conduct surveys in the impact reference zone, so where you do your activity, and preservation reference zone, because you need to be able to distinguish from natural variability.
Mm-hmm.
Because also, I mean, there's also natural variability. Things are changing, populations are changing, environmental conditions may be changing, and you would need to be able to distinguish that from changes that are happening because of activities.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what that purpose is for.
And then in addition, there's preservation set-asides. Because what I was describing, I guess, was a preservation issue. It was like, if you're going to harm this area, if you're going to mine this area, you want to have a similar area preserved to not lose something that's irreplaceable. But what you're saying is, well, actually, from a monitoring perspective, you want to leave an area so that you understand the impacts that you're creating, but then you could later also mine that area or something that's different than the preservation
Yeah,
side.
so that's the difference. So you have, these are two kind of tools. So they have the preservation reference zones and the impact reference zones, which would be most likely within the contract area, at least the impact reference zone as well. And then you have the APIs, which are scattered across the region. And their goal is to maintain regional biodiversity and ecosystem functioning. And they should also be similar in terms of ecological conditions. And there's also the resources compared to the areas where mining would take place. So these are different things.
And then if you add to that this question of connectivity, you also want to make sure that a preservation set aside, whether it's within a contract area or in a API, that is going to be connected enough to the other areas that it can maintain. So it's no good to say, well, this is a perfect little place that has a representation of ecosystem. We'll preserve this and then mine everything around it, and it's no longer connected to the areas that it would kind of need to be connected to in order to survive.
Yeah. So that would also be, for instance, for the purpose of recolonization of areas that have been impacted by deep seabed mining activities.
Right.
So then you could have new recruits from those areas that have not been impacted.
Well, it sounds like an important and also incredibly complex question to try to understand.
Yeah, definitely, because that's also an important question, like how do we monitor all this?
Okay, then final question. Where would you send people who want to know more about the things that we've been talking about today? So I guess the obvious place is I'll put a link to this report. I'm wondering, is that report even available online? I mean, you sent me the report.
It should be. It's but I'm not sure how visible it is to everyone. It's on the website of the Institute of Natural Sciences. So that should be accessible to everyone.
Yep. I will find the link to that, and I'll put it in the show notes to this and in the social media post that we have because this episode with.
And how people can follow up on further work on this, I don't know if they want to follow me on LinkedIn or something, although I'm not the most active social media person. ResearchGate, although of course most of my work is on natural science, on deep sea benthic ecology. So, but I'm not sure if that has already been set up, the website of the Mining Impact 3 research project.
Nice. I will put links to all of this in the show notes that people can follow up. And I'm sure that there will be future episodes also on the Mining Impact 3 project here. So then, thanks so much, Ellen, for your time and thanks for making this report. As people can tell, I'm a huge fan of it.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks for being willing to talk to me today about it.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me to this podcast.
Have a good day.
Yeah. Thank you.